Hello, I'm John Molesky. Welcome to Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. My guests today are Merissa Khurma. Merissa is director of the Wilson Center's Middle East program, and Faria Nasruddin, who is a program associate with that same program, where she serves as project lead for the Middle East Women's Initiative. I want to welcome both of you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And so
Thank you, John.
Today, as you know, we're celebrating an anniversary. It was 5 years ago that you and I discussed on this program, Merissa, the launch of your new blog, the Enheduanna blog. And so before we dig into how the 5 years have gone and what the current topics are, I want to take us back. Talk to us about why the blog was established, what its goal is, and give people who don't know the historical basis for the name.
Thank you, John. I cannot believe it's been 5 years, but here we are today. When I first joined the Wilson Center, we were working to basically resurrect a lot of the work that MAP founder Halis Fandayari had already done on women's rights and women's issues across the Middle East and North Africa region. And there were no blogs linked to the Middle East program. And the goal was really to give a platform to the various and diverse voices of women in the region to write about all the different issues that they are working on. So this is not solely a blog platform to talk about women's rights or the challenges facing women, but rather bringing expertise from all the different voices of women across the MENA region. And I chose Enheduanna as the name because Enheduanna was the first penned author in the world. She was a poet, a high priestess in Mesopotamia. And I thought it was very befitting that the first penned author was not just female, but also came from the region. So with that, I hope that we also introduced a lot of people to a nugget from history that sometimes, passes us by when we read about the region. And I'm very proud to say that we've had over 180 contributors from across the MENA region, all the countries that we work on and work with, from Iran to the east to Algeria to the west, Algeria and Morocco. So I think that it's been a wonderful 5 years. I've learned a lot from so many of the contributors that we've had. And the topics were also very diverse, from climate change to female labor participation to digitization and technology and security. So we were very fortunate to have had this diversity, not only from the various countries, but also the issues and the expertise.
Well, Merissa, congratulations on how successful it's been and all the people you've been able to bring to the table. And the name choice is inspired, right? It's so iconic, it's almost mythological in its power. So I really appreciate that as well. Faria, before we talk more about the blog, tell us about the initiative that you manage as part of the Middle East program.
Yes, so as Merissa mentioned, Enheduanna is in essence the flagship publication of this initiative. But other than that, the initiative produces the Halis Fandayari Forum, similarly bringing voices both from the region and into DC policy circles, and also women leaders in DC policy circles together to really discuss the issues facing the region and women, in particular, women in the region today. Our last discussion was with Ambassador Paula Dobriansky, who was in conversation with Merissa on women and girls in Afghanistan. In essence, what is their positionality today? What can the US do to support them? And we're really reviewing the last 2 years for women and girls. And this is just one of the many subjects that we're touching upon right now. So the initiative, sort of in this iteration, will be focusing both on that, on the women's rights aspects of things, but moving forward, similar to the original mission of Enheduanna, is not only bringing that to the table, but also other issues that women might be grappling with, whether that be climate change, labor force participation, or even peace building and peacemaking. whether that's related to directly to women's rights or just the conditions in which women are living currently.
Yeah, and you know, both of you have mentioned our dear friend and colleague Halle Esfandiari, speaking of iconic or almost legendary. And I want to plug, you know, if those of you want to go back and look at the archive of Wilson Center now and of the Middle East program, you could find lots of programming with Halle. And I'd particularly recommend some of the interviews I did with her over the years about her book, My Prison, My Home, which tells the story of her imprisonment in Iran. But back to the blog and free, I want to ask you about a piece you wrote to kick off International Women's Day. And we're recording this program during Women's History Month. Tell us about what you wrote about in that piece.
Absolutely. So the International Women's Day focused on a overarching theme of investing in women with a variety of sub-themes, namely ending poverty, gender-responsive budgeting, shifting to a green and care economy, and supporting feminist change makers overall. And so the editorial broke down these sub-themes from a MENA region perspective. And so we were writing about the feminization of poverty. One of the MEP interns wrote about poverty in Tunisia and how women are, after COVID, continuing to face this issue, and what steps are being done on the entrepreneurial side to help support women, and also what steps need to be taken. You know, where should research be focusing? In particular, she spoke about food security, among other issues. I then focused on the shift to the green and care economy. And so after COP28, there has been a massive push to open up opportunities for women as the MENA region and really across the globe are establishing new sectors in clean energy. And so this is a great window of opportunity, but part of what the editorial is getting at is that just opening these opportunities isn't necessarily enough, that it needs to be coupled with real structural change to make economies work for women, to eliminate barriers for women's access to these opportunities, whether that be structural change accounting for care work, whether that be shifting educational systems to better prep for workforce skills, amongst others. And then the last topic that we covered underneath International Women's Day themes was supporting feminist change makers. And so we looked at how women at the grassroots level are implementing different strategies to help facilitate women's entry into the economy and participation in society at large. And so we covered some of the blogs that were written recently, one from Turkey, for instance, that was looking at how to shift bro culture in Turkey's tech sector and entrepreneurial sector, how women are supporting each other in this industry, all the way to Sola Mahfouz wrote a piece on education for women and how to change the mindset from educating women will facilitate a nation to educating women needs to be done for their own sake and self-improvement. So, you know, supporting feminist change makers in that sense spans a broad spectrum of tactics and strategies.
Merissa, an impressive range of topics and a deep roster of contributors. Give us the behind the scenes look of how you go about making decisions, editorial decisions on what's coming next.
Well, thank you, John. I'll tell you about how we've done things so far, and then I'll pass this over also to Faria, because part of our goal is not only to expand the network of different women contributors from the region, but also to do things a little bit differently and attract a larger audience. So for us, when we first started, it was really trying to highlight the theme women and leadership. And when I reached out to various women leaders in the region, I wasn't solely reaching out to women ministers or parliamentarians, because these people have positions of authority. But I really came to this with a mindset that you can exercise leadership. Leadership is a practice from wherever you are. You could be in civil society and lead communities and families and organizations, and do a lot of valuable work. And a lot of the work in the social sector in particular across the MENA region is primarily led by women who are challenging stereotypes and pushing the envelope on a daily basis at these local levels. And it's very, very important. So then we started diversifying a little bit more and expanding the topics and the networks to also include other women who are focused on some of the themes that we were working on here at the Wilson Center's Middle East program, from workforce development to the digital economy, to peace and security, gender-based violence, as well as what Faria mentioned, climate change and forced displacement. So it was very much driven by the different themes that we were working on. But we also meet so many people at conferences, and some of them hosted here at the Wilson Center, some of them also in the region. And as soon as I get a sense from a female activist or entrepreneur that there's a story there, I automatically invite them to contribute. And I don't think we've had any people decline so far, which is a great sign.
So I'm guessing, Merissa, that not only are people not declining, but that they're also beginning to volunteer.
Yes, we've had a few writers who actually came back to us and said, I have this in mind. Can I pitch this idea? And I'm very grateful to that, because they come to us knowing that this is a platform that will welcome their ideas, their expertise. And for us, it just highlights the diversity across the region.
Faria, Merissa did an artful segue there to you, and then I stepped on it, but now over to you.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, we're similarly using, and building on the work that Merissa has already done, reaching out to contributors who work on the issues that we're tracking at MEP. That stayed the same, but one initiative that we're particularly excited about is the Rising Voices, Women Speak from MENA, that we're doing in partnership with the news agency More to Her Story. This is taking a slightly different approach, since it's a bit more of a journalistic lens. We're partnering with this news agency to similarly attract voices and stories that wouldn't necessarily reach this audience otherwise. So far, we've done a piece similarly on Afghanistan. We're doing a lot of pieces on Gaza and a lot more areas that we wouldn't necessarily have the connections to get to without this news agency there. And so that is something that we're working on continuing and expanding, taking a slightly different genre approach, but similarly valuable and well needed.
Thanks. Merissa, I want to ask you, I know this is an overly broad question, and I apologize for that, but using the 5 years of the blog as a demarcation point, have things since you launched improved for women in the region, stabilized, gone backwards? We have the Israel-Hamas conflict and other disruptions. The whole world seems to be on fire on any given day. What are the circumstances? How are they trending?
That's a really good question. So I think overall, we're seeing some incremental progress across the board. So if you're looking at the data that just brings together all the different countries together, then there is significant progress when it comes to education, health, and workforce participation. I would say less so on the political participation point. However, there are variations across the region, and that's another key point to highlight, that the MENA region shares a lot, including some of the challenges that women face. But each country has its own set of local sets of challenges, as well as progress reports. And I think that the countries that have really made very significant strides in the last 5 years in particular, when it comes to female labor participation, women in leadership, even closing the gender pay gap, are primarily in the GCC, the countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council. So Saudi Arabia, for example, where we've seen female labor participation skyrocket, to 40%, from about 15 to 20%. And that's a very significant increase in a very short period of time. Similarly, in countries like Bahrain, that we highlighted in our Women in Entrepreneurship report, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar. So a lot of these countries have seen significant progress. Unfortunately, the conflicts and the frozen conflicts, unresolved conflicts, including, for example, in Syria, and the forced displacement crises that they have produced, brings a new set of challenges. So with Syrian refugee populations, in Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon, the rate of, girls attending schools have plummeted significantly. We've seen the rise of child marriages as well. So those are all, unfortunately, crises of the conditions on the ground. And, zooming into the Hamas-Israel war currently, there was a new component that was injected into the Palestinian-Israeli conflict that we've also highlighted on Enheduanna, which is sexual violence. And there are UN reports that have, basically pointed to the use of sexual violence. And then you see how this conflict is impacting girls and women in Gaza and the humanitarian catastrophe that has unfolded there. And so there are really very different pictures across the region. And sometimes it's unfair to say, well, the region is, overall doing really well, because there are really stark differences across the board.
Yeah, for Faria, along the same lines as Merissa was just talking about, the unevenness across the region and progress where it's happening, but regression where it's not. What about young people within the region, young women in particular? Are we seeing a different set of expectations among young people? And is that beginning to gain any traction culturally or politically?
I would similarly echo Marissa's comments in that you're seeing quite stark differences across the region when it comes to young people. I mean, you see, for instance, Iran and young people and young women in particular lead, 2 years ago, leading the Mahsa Amini protests.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in that sense, you see young people being quite empowered across the region, empowered to speak out, empowered to change things. But then you see stark contrast when it comes to Syria, as Merissa mentioned, and the displacement conflict, in which young women, in particular, women are heavily impacted by that. And so that stark contrast is similarly reflected amongst young people. And it would be difficult to paint it with a broad brush to say that overall young people are more empowered to, initiate change, to speak out, because in some places in the region, the circumstances just aren't necessarily pointing to that. But the momentum is still present and is there in pockets.
Thanks. Before we close, I want to give each of you an opportunity for a final thought. You've been generous in answering my questions, but there may be some things I haven't brought up that you think are worth mentioning. And so let's begin in the order of introduction. Merissa, any final thoughts?
So I think the one thing to keep in mind is that change is taking place. It's not linear. And we have to have the strategic patience to see through with some of the positive changes, but also to understand the setbacks, because there are external factors that sometimes we cannot control. But I am very proud of what Enheduanna has done, and I look forward to the next 5 years to see how it's going to change in the next 5 years when we look back, 10 years from 5 years from now.
I just hope it goes slower than the first 5 have gone. We got to slow this thing down, Merissa. Moving too fast. Faria, you get the final thought.
Oh, thank you. I would say that I'm also excited about the change that is happening. It's similarly, as Merissa said, it's not linear. Building on that, I'm excited to see how change will differ from how change has happened in other places in the world. I think women in the region are really forging their own paths and forging new identities for themselves, forging new norms. And I think that will create really lasting change, and I think is very exciting to see, although sometimes difficult to endure.
Well, thanks to both of you. Congratulations again on the 5th anniversary of Enheduanna. And I want to tell our viewers and listeners, if you just come to the website wilsoncenter.org and you find the programs tab, go to the Middle East program. The resources we're talking about today and many others are available to you, because our guests aren't just writing and talking about women's leadership. They are walking the walk and talking the talk. So thanks to both of you. Congratulations on this milestone.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
we hope you enjoyed this edition of Wilson Center Now and that you'll join us again soon. Until then, for all of us at the center, I'm John Molesky. Thank you for your time and interest.